All right. So, obviously, I'm Andy Mercado from Mercado Media with my co-host
Alex Kinash. Good morning, everyone. I am wide awake and raring to go.
Absolutely wide awake. Special guest
Dylan Burns, happy to be here.
and also special guest.
Operator Starsky.
And who's your friend, Starsky?
Even more special.
Yeah, this is Samantha Williams from New Zealand. I believe that half of the chat that we have here is acquainted with Samantha because she does a lot for Ukrainian refugees, Ukrainian army. So can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi.
Perfect. So, what a wonderful morning, and as you guys might be able to see, Operator Starsky brought donuts. He brought the dessert, the morning dessert, so we're going to be able to eat like promised. But first, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to my stream, Dylan? Let everyone know they're pretty acquainted with Starsky, and we'll get to him. But why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us your background a little bit.
Sure, my name's Dylan Burns. I'm a Twitch streamer and war journalist. I started streaming when I was 18, focusing on geopolitics and hosting political conversations. But I always had a deep interest in geopolitics. I went to the university to try to study international relations. But once the war started, I took a strong focus on the war. My audience seemed to enjoy my coverage and enjoy my commentary on the conflict, and I got donated quite a lot of money in a very short period of time, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought about what I could do with this money, and I made the decision that if the best decision I could make personally for I think my career, but also from my personal interest in covering the war in the best possible way, was to come here and try to cover the war on the ground and get an on-the-ground perspective. It wasn't my first time ever thinking about doing war journalism. I had an interest in possibly doing it in Syria, but I'm very young, so I kind of missed that. I'm 22.
Oh, wow.
So obviously in 2014, I couldn't be 13 years old with Syrian rebels.
You had an interest at that age, though.
Yes, and I went to a high school and middle school where you could do all of your classes online on computers, but you still went to physically school. And between classes, I would look at a lot of open source intel on the Syrian rebels and how the Syrian civil war is progressing and the SDF counteroffensives against ISIS and stuff like that. And I got an interest in it, and that's when I eventually took a class at the University of Maryland while I was still in high school in international law.
Wow.
And then I started working with some congressional campaigns, talking to them about the Kurdish struggle for independence and about a bunch of other issues. I know the Michaela Wilkes campaign, State Senator Jill Carter. I advised their congressional campaign on foreign policy as well.
Wow.
But once the war kicked off, my interest became focused solely on covering Ukrainians' liberation and making sure that that Ukraine fatigue would not set in,
right,
and that people would not forget, and there would not just become a passing fad. Everybody for like a month kind of wanted to be Ukrainian. The whole world was wearing yellow and blue, and I wanted to make sure that that passion wasn't just like a quick fashion statement, but it was a real commitment to democracy. It was a real commitment to Ukrainian liberation. It was a real commitment to making sure that they got all the territory back. And so I think the only way to do that is to record the stories on the ground and to show people the personal human stories on the ground, one-to-one interviews, showing the effects of the Russian bombardments on the ground, the humanitarian effects. And I also have a personal commitment to kind of recording the history. I believe that I think it was I think the president of the Washington Post said in the 1960s that journalism is the first draft of history, and if there's no one here to record it and there's no one here to witness it, then it's like it never happened. It might have happened to the people who were war crimed or hurt by the invasion, but unless it's documented, then the history books won't talk about it. And so I also have that's part of the reason why I try to have so many interviews with people, because their perspectives are so important in trying to tell the story 100 years from now when we're all dead.
100%. What is the most difficult part of your journey when you were dealing with politicians and trying to talk to them about the realities of what you're seeing or what you're doing?
A lot of it is political expediency. Sometimes when I talk to politicians, I work mostly with ones running for Congress for the first time, because since I was pretty young, it was usually people who had nothing to lose and could take a risk by hiring somebody young like me, but trying to convince a lot of them, definitely more progressive ones, that the United States should be active on the world stage, that we should not be taking an isolationist worldview. I remember when I was advising the Michaela Wilkes campaign, it wasn't a difficult sell to talk about the Kurdish liberation struggle and to condemn the Turkish invasion of Syria, but it was a difficult sell to say that we should be present in the country supporting them and talking to them about the effects of the Russian invasion, how America has done a lot of, I would say, messed up things on the world stage, but for the wrong thing, the wrong story to take away for that is for America to recluse, to shut itself off from the world, because it's not like all of the evils of the world just end because America isn't there. This is a great example in this country. And so I'd rather America be a positive force for good. And I think Ukraine is a great example of the positive America can have in standing up for international law.
Absolutely, 100%. Operator Starsky, being here, Ukrainian, in the Ukrainian military, what's your perspective on American politics or Americans that come here?
So we expect America to be more involved into this. One reason is literally because Ukrainians remember the Budapest Memorandum, and we were promised security guarantees, and what we have doesn't look like security much to me. And second thing is, during this Budapest meeting, Ukrainians wanted to show their good intentions, because let's face reality, majority of the ICBMs that we had located in Ukraine were aimed at Washington. Okay, and we wanted to say, guys, we changed, we don't want that shit, we're not part of Soviet Union anymore, we want to be friends with the rest of the world. That's what we wanted to say. And as for the U.S., I can say that the U.S. already helps big time Ukraine, Ukrainian people, Ukrainian refugees, our families, which is very important because our soldiers have, this psychological relief while fighting, knowing that their families are safe and being cared by other people, which is very important to us. So in the future, I believe that we can improve our cooperation big time in terms of military, in terms of sharing experience and things like that. But most of all, I want our nations to be like real friends. It's very important to have friendly relations with all the nations, all the countries, to have partnership, to have good trade, because this is the only path to become, to becoming successful country. As Grandpa Savkovich in Katerinivka said, there is only one way to make good relations with other people, is through knowledge, trade, and things like that, which I think it's wise words.
And now, Dylan, what has been your experience here? You say you talk to people directly, like that's what you want to do. You want to get involved, ask questions. What are some of the experiences you've had interacting with the people here, in your journalism?
So one of the things I like to do is make sure that I communicate directly with locals and not just English speakers. I make sure that when I go into an area that before I do anything, I get a general feeling of the area, like where the local restaurants are, where the local aid centers are, where the local rescue workers are. And I also try to make sure, because I'm an English speaker and I only speak English, that I don't get in the English bubble. I don't get in the American reporter bubble, where we just all surround and talk about, isn't it great how America's being a hero today? And I try to surround myself with people who are not only Ukrainian, but also Germans and Belgians and other people who are trying to help the country. Recently, I just got back. Well, I didn't just get back, but about 2-3 weeks ago, I got back from Kherson. I went down there to film rescue operations. And while down there, I kind of got a last-minute embed with the German rescue crew. It was weird getting into Kherson because the press officers almost felt like they didn't want us there. And what I mean by that is not because they didn't want us to cover anything, like they're trying to hide anything, but they felt very, very uncomfortable about the level of, there was not a lot of safety in Kherson. There's not really anything they can do to stop the shelling, and the shelling in the city was constant. Every 5-10 minutes you heard an artillery shell going off, and you can hear, because of how close the Russians are, you can hear them firing, and then you can hear the impact. And that is a very weird feeling to hear, boom, and then you just wait 2 seconds for the next boom, and you don't know how close it's going to be. And so we got a last second embed. It was me and Alex Bardaway of New Voice of Ukraine. We got a last second embed with some German aid workers, and they were in the area to rescue animals that were drowning in the flooding, to go to people's homes where they had left their pets and check if the pets are there, deliver aid to people who need it, and help any people who are possibly hurting.
Yeah.
And we went out onto the water, and they immediately ran into boat trouble. Which afterwards I found out was not the first time that boat that they had been given by local coordinators had trouble, but it had been reported, but nobody had done anything. And so one of the main takeaways I had at that moment was, wow, this could have been coordinated better. Not because I'm not blaming anybody for a lack of skill and coordination. It was just it needed to be more centralized when it come to coordination. It needed to be better communication. A lot of these things are kind of done in like text groups, and it wasn't like a gridding system for response time. But that was like a side story. The main story that happened is that while we were filming the rescue operations, a Russian private military company by the name of PMC Convoy, while supported by drone spotters, started shelling our rescue operation. They injured a British expat friend of mine by the name of John Jones. A piece of shrapnel entered his upper thigh and his lower abdomen. The only thing that ended up saving his life was that it hit his pelvis and it got deflected. And the thing that really shocked me about the whole thing, and they really just kept shelling the shoreline over and over and over again. None of us were armed. None of us were soldiers. We were just journalists with aid workers doing aid work. The thing that really shocked me, though, wasn't that the fact that they did that, because it wasn't the first time this has been reported. People saw that the chief rabbi of Ukraine also got shelled doing similar work in the area. What really shocked me is the next day while I was at the hospital with John Jones, I get a text message on my phone. It's a Telegram link, and it's a Russian Telegram channel by the name of Disgusting8 that had posted a video of us getting shelled, saying we were Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, while they were playing rock music over them shelling us and trying to kill John Jones and the rest of the rescue workers. And so we're working with the report. We've gathered about 9 to 10 witness statements. We've gotten so much footage of it, and the Russians themselves provided us more evidence. So the case is pretty clear cut. I'm going to be publishing it with Offbeat Research in the next week or two. I've taken time with it. I know that, like, Washington Post, some other outlets have asked for it, but I want to make sure that it's done correctly. And because I remember when I was in Mykolaiv, I had also experienced the city being shelled at the start of the Kherson counteroffensive, and a lot of civilians died there. And it was a really shocking experience for me because it was the first time that I had witnessed such a clear war crime. And when I looked at the news at the end of the day, it just said 3 dead, 17 injured. And that was the only mention it had. And I wanted to make sure that this report didn't just say 1 injury. I wanted to make sure that people knew exactly what happened, that it was clear that we were aid workers, we had no weapons, and they deliberately shelled it, and then they bragged about it, because in the video they posted, they were playing rock music as if it was like a game when they were shelling rescue workers.
Sickening, bro. I can't imagine that, but the experience that you've shared, Operator Starsky. And also, guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna go and edit the stream really quick so I can tag both of their channels, so you guys can go and sub to DylanBurnsLIVE on YouTube and also Operator Starsky on YouTube. So, Dylan, what has been the most challenging experience you've had as your time as a war journalist, a war reporter in Ukraine?
Well, personally, it's being away from family. You know, my father, you know, he's dealing with sickness, and that's very difficult to be away from my father at that time, and missing a lot of family holidays, you know, birthdays of my little brother and stuff like that. That's obviously very difficult. As for being here specifically, I would say that honestly, a lot of it's just the paperwork. Sometimes it's just the bureaucracy. The press card system is pretty simple, but sometimes trying to coordinate with local press officers and figuring out like who you exactly have to call, what the contact information is, setting up a meeting, setting up calls, and getting approval for stuff. That is the stuff that I've found most difficult, which is why I also concentrate on the human stories, because it makes it a lot easier. I don't really have to deal with press officers if I'm just meeting somebody and interviewing them in their home. I don't need to get approval to ask somebody what they experienced firsthand. So I can kind of circumvent circumvent the bureaucracy in a way by focusing a lot more on the human interest stories. I still do embeds, so I still have to deal with them every once in a while, but just the bureaucracy has been the most professionally difficult. But personally, it's been away from my Meemaw, of course.
Yeah. Well, good news about press officers is we have one of the most famous ones sitting right here. So, so after this, you'll have a very good press officer connection.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah, so there you go, because this is the most well-known press officer.
So you're gonna give me that Zelensky interview?
I can give you a National Guard commander interview. Zelensky is. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Zelensky's tough, bro. I know you're shooting for the stars. There you go. So he's been. How long? You've been here since day one, right?
I haven't been here since day one.
Okay.
See, originally, because again, this is my first time ever doing on-the-ground, in-person war journalism.
Yeah.
And so originally, what I told my family was, "Don't worry, I'm just going to Warsaw. We're just gonna, I'm gonna talk to some refugees." And well, Lublin's close to Ukraine, but it's not in Ukraine. Well, Lviv is like West Ukraine. It's Kyiv. It's in the center of the country. Look, these are professional soldiers, so this forward operating position, when you think about it, it's actually quite safe. And so I've slowly, I just kept going and going. But I came, I think like probably May of last year, and then I stayed till about the winter season. Then I came back, spent Christmas with the family, because you gotta spend Christmas with the family. Then I came back after I celebrated my birthday in March, and I've been here since March. So this is my second time here.
You just keep this place has a way of just keeping you here. It sounds like, bro.
It sucks you in, man. It sucks you in.
Tell me why I was only supposed to be here for a weekend and I ended up extending for 2 weeks.
I was supposed to be here for a month.
Oh my god. Yeah, it just has a way of doing that, and Alex called it right away. Tell us about your most recent experience. You were just in Kyiv, correct?
Yeah, I just got back from Kharkiv. I was going up there to film with artillery crews. That didn't end up happening, and the reason that didn't end up happening is because the front line got very, very violent very, very quickly. Everybody's probably heard about the 100,000 soldiers deployed in the area, the 900 tanks also deployed, the 555 artillery guns. It's the one area in the country where the Russians are still consistently attacking. I will say, though, Kharkiv, it's a completely different city from when I first went there last year.
Yeah.
When I first went there last year, the whole city, it was a ghost town. The east of the city was bomb riddled. I was constantly hearing artillery. We had to take cover when they were targeting the city's electrical grid. This time, the aquarium was open. I got to go to the city's aquarium. I got to spend time in the Argentinian grill, which I heavily recommend. Very good, fantastic steak, fantastic tea, and fantastic asparagus. And so I felt like I got to see a different side of Ukraine that I didn't think I would get to see until the end of the war.
Wow.
But I think this just shows how important getting artillery out of the distance of these major cities are, because it's the main tool for terror that the Russians use in major population centers. When I was in Mykolaiv, that was the main tool of terror too, because I was there for the start of the Kherson counteroffensive, and they just started peppering the city center once the counteroffensive happened, and they started to panic. But in Kharkiv, I did get to do an interview with the Kraken commander, and it was a long interview. It was only supposed to be an hour. It lasted 2 hours, and we got to cover everything from Ukrainian history to the counteroffensive to the most difficult part of being a commander. It was a fantastic interview. I'm happy to release it. It's going to be part of a series I'm doing called Ukraine Uncensored, where I do these personal interviews and we ask questions that a lot of times you don't see asked in mainstream media.
Right, because they're just up in the Continental on the top of the roof waiting for the breaking news streams to come in. What has been the most rewarding experience that you've had? I asked you the most challenging, but what has been the most rewarding experience you've had since being here?
I would say that the most personally rewarding experience, there's somebody I know in Kharkiv called Anastasia, good friend of mine. Her father was sadly killed by Russian Grad rocket strikes while he was feeding a stray cat on his front porch. Yeah, I think yes. Fantastic person. And I did an interview with her, and the interview I did got her a lot of attention from much bigger content creators than me, and that eventually led to her raising tens upon tens of thousands of dollars for vehicles, for optics equipment, for a ton of stuff to help local defenders. And seeing how highlighting these stories can motivate other people to action. Because after seeing a lot of it, definitely early on, I went a little bit doomer because it was like there's just so much that needs to be done, and it feels like people are so disconnected. But that kind of dragged me out of it, seeing how that interview could inspire people to action. So seeing how genuinely people cared, and how much those donations and how much these interviews can on occasion really help.
Dude, go ahead, Starsky.
Yeah, Anastasia Paraskevova, she's a volunteer in Kharkiv, and I wish I could share a link to her Twitter. Please, guys, if you can, support her because she does a great job supporting Ukrainian soldiers.
After this, you can just hit underneath.
Yeah.
Because I retweeted the link, the good link now. If we had 2 failed links, but the good one, if you at her Twitter underneath, everyone can go follow. So you got.
She's about to do a fundraiser for drone guns for people over there as well. I'm going to see what I can do to help her with that. But do keep an eye on her Twitter account because she's always doing fundraisers. She's always helping people. She posts the receipts for everything. She's really good at fundraising for the local defenders out there, and they really appreciate it and they need it. I've seen how a lot of the artillery crews late last year during the winter time, they were suffering from frostbite. They didn't have proper clothing to keep themselves from dealing with that. They didn't have earmuffs, and due to the donations she got, she was able to completely transform that squad, and they were able to get the proper equipment that they need to fight this war with dignity.
Next question is, what is the best way you've seen to donate? Many do the corporate nonprofit. I know we're gonna get there, Alex. I got you. We're gonna. So the big corporate nonprofits, people will raise money for like Red Cross or UNICEF. Is that really effective, or what do you, in your eyes, is the most effective way for Westerners to be fundraising or donating to assist Ukrainian soldiers? Or the civilians too, humanitarian.
The problem with a lot of the NGOs isn't just that they have incredibly high overhead. A lot of them are kind of, some of them are based not outside of the country. I probably would not be donating to anything that isn't based in Ukraine. There's something about that feels weird. I'm going to trust the on-the-ground people, the people that I know on the ground, that I see on the ground more because they're here, so I know they're serious, right? So if they're here, I at least know to some degree that they're serious, to at least they're willing to come here and put themselves here, and that makes me trust them more. If I know somebody like Anna who is going out there and donating, and there's no overhead because she's taking the money and exchanging it, I think it's the best way because you get the most bang for your buck, and you can directly see the receipts from her giving you, and you can see how the equipment you have has an impact, and that's what I prefer. That doesn't mean that there aren't good charities out here. Degas Paul is a fantastic charity out here helping defenders. There's the Solidarity Collective is another good group of people that I know that are doing good work out here. So it's not like all just like bigger charities are bad, but if you're going to donate to one of those charities, I would recommend you donate something that isn't based in, say, like I don't know, like Berlin or London, but something based in Ukraine. That's what I always encourage people to do.
I would like to also mention one thing. People are asking whether it's better to donate directly to soldiers. So what we do in the army, for example, in my brigade, we usually have this group where we receive all the requests from our battalions, companies. We collect all the requests, and then we make a big letter that includes all those things that we need that are required by our soldiers, and then we send it, for example, to Come Back Alive charity fund. So it's all is done centralized, in a centralized manner. Usually charities receive requests from soldiers, from the brigades, from units, and then they spend time searching for all the required equipment, and they just ship everything to the unit. This is how it's done properly, because sometimes a soldier, a private, goes, we need a car, and he starts collecting money for the car, and people send him money and stuff, and then it appears that he's a scammer. Or they just contact people directly through direct messages and go, can you please donate for a drone or something? 90% cases that's scammers. So we are working with charities only through like centralized manner, and if you want to donate to charities, because they are working on those lists, collecting everything that is required, sending everything to the units. This is how it's done properly.
All right. So, Dylan, what is the best way? I mean, we talked about fundraising, but in terms of non-fundraising and donating, what is some ways that Westerners can aid Ukraine if they can't come here, spend money here? Is the war still happening? What are some reasonable ways that Westerners can help Ukraine?
Without donating, you mean?
Yes.
Honestly,
Like, cause just say they don't have it right now. Say they're having a hard time and they just don't have $1 to spare.
I'll tell you
There you
exactly my experience.
There you go.
I have talked to a lot of people who have communicated with congressmen who are, let's say, apprehensive about supporting Ukraine. There are a few who just don't support Ukraine because, let's just say they got a few screws loose. They're isolationist. Your Matt Gaetz, your Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're never going to win those people over.
Right.
But there are a legitimate section of politicians in office who are at least sympathetic to Ukraine to some degree and would support Ukraine, but it has become too politically partisan in their mind to come out and publicly support it, and they don't think it's politically beneficial enough for them. Now, I could make the argument all day about why political expediency should not go over the morality of supporting this liberation struggle. But that is a very nice sentiment, but that's not going to work for the suits up in Washington. So I would say one of the better ways you can help is if you have a congressman that does support Ukraine, tell them, hey, keep it up. You support Ukraine, you've got my vote. Or, of course, you can have other issues that can maybe deviate your vote, but you can make it clear that that is something that has encouraged you to vote for them. Even if you don't agree with them, let's say you're a Democrat and they're a Republican, you could say, hey, you supporting Ukraine is something that makes me consider voting for you more. Something like that. So even when it's somebody that you disagree with, you can still push them in the right direction. Definitely if you're in your district, they're going to listen to you more than if you're like calling somebody up from half the country away. So letting your politicians know that you support Ukraine and make it so they think, this is actually politically useful for me to support Ukraine. There is a real, not only lobby out there to support Ukraine, but there's a real grassroots support for Ukraine. So please let your politicians know, even if they overwhelmingly support Ukraine, right? Overwhelmingly, they personally come here and fired HIMARS at the Russians. Not enough. Go let them know anyway. Just let them know that they should continue to support Ukraine until the job is done.
100%. And what is something that now the West could do more to help Ukraine?
I think, honestly, right now, demining equipment. Demining equipment is so important and it gets so little coverage. I lived with deminers in the Kharkiv Oblast for about a month, and they were constantly talking to me about shortages of demining equipment. And there are a lot of difficulties with them making requests for demining equipment and just not being available, and also the difficulty in them personally fundraising, with some people in higher command positions not liking having people under them fundraise because they don't necessarily like the image that could bring upon their unit.
Right.
And so that can become very, very complicated. And now, so I still think that if there's a way to support them individually, as long as they're not a scammer, you know them personally or any way like that, that's good. But some of this stuff can only be done by the federal government. These large demining vehicles that are like $3 million, $4 million, $5 million, I can't pull that out of my pocket and donate that. That has to be done by the federal government. Recently, I think it was the Washington Post published a report that only 15% of Ukraine's demining equipment requests have been fulfilled. If we're going to send cluster munitions and stuff like that to Ukraine, I agree with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's statement that if we're going to send these types of weapons, we also need to send the equipment that will be necessary to disable them, because I've met the people who are going to have to disable that once the war is done. They're good people, they have families, they have kids, they have lives they would like to return to, and the best way to help them return back to those lives is to give them proper demining equipment, because the Russians are desperately trying to make it so, at least the ones with experience, the experienced sappers, they're desperately trying to make it so each mine, you're second guessing if it's booby trapped, or they're trying to deliberately booby trap it. I remember I had this one conversation with the deminer, and it was a really good interview. It's part of I'm trying to do a mini documentary about demining because there's just so little coverage about it. And something he told me is, he said, the demining and being a sapper is kind of like an art form, where there's a constant struggle between the mine layer, where he places the mine, he stands up, he looks around. If somebody was to run from this mine, where are they gonna go hide? Then he places the mine there. Then he hides mines under this mine. I remember once we had a crew out there while we were filming out there that was killed because they had 5 anti-tank mines stacked on top of each other, and it killed 2 people, injured 3 others. In that, I was with them for a month, and I think we lost 5 or 6 people in that area, just in the Kharkiv Oblast. And that's just Kharkiv, and there's other areas that are being demined too. But he said it was a constant struggle between the deminer that was trying to learn the tactics of the sapper, and the sapper, the Russian sapper, who's trying to learn the tactics of the deminer. And the best thing we can help them in that struggle against these guys that are placing bombs in civilian homes, bombs very close to civilians. So I remember I found a lot of butterfly mines like 20 feet away from civilian homes in the Kharkiv Oblast. They just drop them in mass. There's a lot of butterfly mines. I was finding container after container after container of these things. And the best way you can help them in that struggle against the Russian sapper is by getting them the proper equipment to do the job.
100%, 100%. What are some ways now, as a journalist, I'm sure you come across misinformation, bullshit, absolute lies. What are ways that you combat that, or do you combat that? Do you ignore it, or do you engage with it? What are some ways that you deal with that?
Sometimes I have people in my community, because I constantly engage with this information. Yeah. I like getting on my stream and yelling into the camera like, this is the fucking bullshit. I like doing that. Yes. Right? I'm young, I still got a voice, and if I can yell, I'd like to yell. Exactly. Right? I gotta use that useful energy for something productive. I particularly like yelling at Tucker Carlson. That's one of my favorite ones. But the fact of the matter is that on the #1 American news show in the United States until recently when he was fired, Tucker Carlson was filling that primetime slot, and he was saying stuff like, for every Russian soldier that dies, 7 Ukrainian soldiers died. He'd say that on his show, Fox would never issue a correction, and then RFK Jr. would come on a week later, repeat the same thing, and they still don't issue a correction. And he's constantly saying things like this. Recently, during an interview with Mike Pence, he said that in Ukraine, they're oppressing the Christians. They're arresting all the Christians for being Christian, right? And Mike Pence is standing there trying to push back against it. Like, I talked to Christian leaders over there, and I don't like Mike Pence, but I even felt sympathy for the guy. Like, he was like, that this is not happening. I talked to Christian leaders, and that crowd was completely against, hated him. Yeah. It was like he was the devil incarnate.
Immediately.
The thing is, though, he was telling the truth.
He was.
And so, whether or not we like that these lies are out them, they're out there. Yeah. And so, if they're out there and they're being spouted by some of the most popular political commentators in American culture, there has to be content to dispute it. So when somebody looks up Tucker Carlson, they don't get like a compilation of him lying about Ukraine. They get a compilation of people debunking him lying about Ukraine. I would prefer that, even if it gives them attention, and I hate to give attention to that lovely individual, but someone has to do it.
100%. I view it the same way. Some people will say, and especially for people that have big, large platforms, that have that, like low-level bots and shit. I yeet them pretty quickly, or like get rid of them.
Only mute them. Never block them, because if you block them, they're gonna get some like, I pissed them off. If you mute them, you'll never see them, but they'll still boost your posts.
Mods, new strat. New troll strat, just mute. It might actually be fun for the mods,
and
too.
They'll keep posting, and they'll never know.
Yeah, Hey, new strat mods, mute from now on. Block if we don't no more blocking, we'll just mute, and they'll just get pissed, but they'll think that they're chatting it up. Starsky, now you have an amazing way of combating the Russian misinformation. Number one, you've lived with it your entire life, being here in Ukraine. You have these skits that you do, but still, what motivates you to keep, you're fighting the fight, you're literally fighting the Russians, but what keeps you motivated to keep continuing to combat the misinformation?
Basically, Russian fake sharers themselves. Yeah. Because, for example, whenever I hear some ridiculous fucking bullshit like Ukrainians lose 7 men to 1, like against 1 in case of Russians, I go, oh, interesting, let's take a calculator. So if Russians lost 250,000 troops in these almost 513 days. It means that Ukrainians lost 1,750,000 people dead, which means that if we're talking about wounded, which is usually like 3-4 times more than dead, we're talking about what, like 10 million people, like 10 million strong men wounded and dead. Basically, on the streets of Ukraine, you should not see men at all. Considering that almost 10 million Ukrainians became refugees, and the whole population of Ukraine is 40 million people, it means that basically on the streets you should only see like toddlers, okay, teenagers, and like old men and women. Everybody else is fucking dead, which is bullshit. Yeah, but in case we're talking that, for example, Russians are losing 7 times less people than that. Where's my calculator here? So it means that basically he says that only 35, I mean, if we're talking about the other end, okay, the smaller end, it means that only 35,000 Russians died since the beginning of the invasion, and I think they've lost more vehicles than 35,000 soldiers. Yeah. If we combine all the anti-air systems, all the artillery systems, mortars, trucks, fuel trucks, let alone tanks, armored vehicles and shit. So I like mathematics. I was always sick when I had mathematics in school, but I make up for it, and basically you can just use numbers, they never lie.
Numbers don't lie. It seems like we have Alex doing a little fashion show for us. He's been showcasing his outfits. Yeah, he started with a t-shirt and shorts, and he's upgraded to jeans and a sweatshirt. So with that, why don't you go ahead and give us the weather report of the day? Since he's figuring it out as we go, it seems. Why don't you let us know?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Dylan, the people were very impressed by what you said so far, so thank you. And I think you articulate your points very well.
Thank you.
The demining issue is significant.
See how long I can keep up the act.
I think you speak with great knowledge, and I think your energy, given that you haven't been to sleep, is admirable. So good on you, man. The weather, well, I mean, look at it, Andrew. I mean, show everyone what we're looking at here. We're slightly overcast and cloudy today. It's actually 62 Fahrenheit, but for some reason I'm freezing, hence I'm putting on more and more clothes. I'm going to go and find a bloody mammoth to wear in a second.
That's why I have shorts, because I wanted to stay awake.
Yeah, mate, you're a stronger man than I. I'm going to try and use your hair as a bloody, as a duvet in a minute, I think.
Let me add a little bit.
Oh yeah, go for it, man.
Hey guys, for this today, I know you guys are asking, like, the Dylan here is a real fucking war journalist, like in the trenches. I'm doing my best so I can be like him someday. I'm doing what I can starting here in Kyiv. Ask some questions if you guys seriously have some about the front or anything that you guys would like to know. Obviously, you have Operator Starsky here too. I mean, you can ask us about, our favorite colors and shit, but you guys can ask some serious questions here. All right.
I've got a good question here that's come in actually. So there was an interesting thing this morning. You talked about aid agencies earlier on, right? And there's a lot of news in Britain this morning that the Red Cross in Belarus, the actual head of it, admitted helping smuggle Ukrainian children out of the country into Russia, right? So that's what the Red Cross can do. But the question for you, Dylan, is do you think the POWs and kidnapped children in general will be able to return home? And how might they be able to do that?
I'll be blunt. I'm very pessimistic about the immediate return of these children and the immediate return of these POWs. I think when it comes to exchanging POWs, especially, the Russians will only do it if they can get something out of it. They'll only do it if they can get their own high-value POWs back. That's unless they kill them with sledgehammers afterwards. But besides that scenario, they'll only do it if they can get something out of them. And for them, there's nothing they can really get out of giving back these children, like, willingly. somebody makes the treacherous journey, and I've seen a lot of news reports cover these moms making a journey into the country that is currently invading their towns and villages, having to travel into Russia itself to pick up these children at these boarding schools where they're wearing uniforms with the Russian flag, the nation state that kidnapped them, being told to learn the Russian language, being encouraged to accept Russian citizenship, having this pushed on them. Essentially, the Russian state is attempting to brainwash these children. All the evidence points towards that direction. Some people are more reserved, like, oh, we don't have all the evidence. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelmingly clear at this point. And to kind of like dilly-dally and beat around the bush is only going to delay what should be an overwhelming international response to this. And now, I don't think in the immediate future all these children are going to be returned outside of the moms that make that treacherous journey. But I will say that the international warrant, the ICC warrant on Putin, has already caused a casualty to his diplomacy. We're seeing that where this BRICS conference is supposed to be hosted in South Africa, Putin is no longer going to go. He's going to send Sergei Lavrov in his place because the South African opposition to Democratic Alliance has challenged the ANC's protection of Putin and said, if he comes here, we're signatories to the International Criminal Court. That man kidnapped children. Your job is to arrest him. Why is it that if you sign a treaty, all of a sudden when it's inconvenient, now it doesn't matter, right? Exactly. That's not how international law, that's not how these treaties are supposed to work. If you didn't mean to stand by the principle of the treaty, you shouldn't have signed it in the first place. If you're going to sign these treaties and you're going to stand by these rules, you need to stand by it consistently or they don't matter. Laws and rules don't matter if you only follow them when they're convenient. And so, even if I don't think that these children are going to be returned, at least all of them are not going to be returned in the immediate future, they showed the intent to kidnap them for a reason. They want to brainwash a generation of children. They want to, in my opinion, push out the people who identify as Ukrainian, the people who are Ukrainian. They want to push out that population and replace them with a population that is subservient to the Russian state. And they're trying to create that generation out of kidnapped children, which is unbelievably sick. But I have yet to see any evidence that they've deviated off of that path. And so if they haven't deviated off of the path of the destruction of the Ukrainian national identity, why would they give back the children? That's why they need to be made to give back the children.
100% same. Yep, I was just about to ask you the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to add something to this because, first of all, we have Philip Itner here in the chat. Yeah. Philip, buddy, hey! Buddy. And regarding the Red Cross, I will be highly fucking critical about this organization because, first of all, none of our prisoners, of Ukrainian prisoners held in Russia or on the occupied territories of Donbass or Crimea, none of them have ever seen the representatives of Red Cross in those prisons. International Red Cross doesn't fucking work. They never arrived to Donbass when our president called them to arrive to visit Olenivka. We know that Ukrainian prisoners were murdered in Olenivka by the Russians. They don't fucking work. Here we have their office here in Kyiv, just like several hundred meters away from us. They have a lot of expensive cars that are used only to travel around Kyiv, buy pizza and shit. And a lot of their representatives openly say that they don't support Ukraine, in private talks, because they have people from, for example, Cuba, internationally recognized state supporter of terrorism, that have this pro-Russian views, anti-American, anti-Western views, and they don't support Ukraine, but money don't stink. That's why they're there in the International Red Cross. Ukrainian Red Cross is different because when shit hit the fan in Kakhovka, when the dam was destroyed by Russian terrorists, Ukrainian Red Cross was fucking shocked by the reaction of International Red Cross, rather by absence of this reaction, and they traveled themselves to Kakhovka, to Kherson, Mykolaiv region, and started helping people, evacuating people that were shelled by Russian terrorists during this evacuation. But the International Red Cross is a fucking joke.
Back to Alex.
I've been arguing with the British Red Cross on Facebook for a little while now, and it has escalated quite massively to the point that like I keep getting death threats from people from it. Like, it's very strange how there's quite a lot of, they've got such a strong brand and marketing that actually people don't really understand some of the detail. But Dylan, again, I mean, you do articulate yourself so well that a few people have asked, can you run for president in America, which is pretty cool, and you would certainly lower the average age of the candidates, I think, quite significantly. But in actual questions, we've got two quite good ones here that are war related, and people are interested in your view on why Bakhmut was so important to the Russians and Wagner. What was their reasoning for being so determined to seize that city?
I mean, there is now. I think sometimes people completely disregard the strategic importance of Bakhmut. At one point, it could have been a logistical hub before it was a smoldering pile of ash that where a city once stood, as the Russians have turned many cities across Ukraine into. So that strategic purpose has been eliminated, but it is a stepping stone for their advance to try to conquer the rest of the Donbass, to try to scrape away some type of victory out of this entire mess that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So they can say, look, we did something. We achieved a thing, I guess. We saved the Donbass by killing everyone here. Congratulations, you liberated the East, the Russian people speaking of the Donbass. You just liberated them of life itself. But when it comes to the symbolic significance of the city, a lot of times these battles, like Iwo Jima or Stalingrad or any big battle beforehand, nobody knows necessarily that it's going to be this big symbolic moment in history. No one knew Iwo Jima was going to be as important or as symbolic as it was in the 21 days of hell there. It was only afterwards. And so I think what happened was that they took such a beating, that they got so humiliated, and they had so few victories after the Kharkiv counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive and pulling back from Kyiv. And you were even seeing Russian state media getting more and more critical, maybe not of Putin directly, but of commanders. You were seeing the Russian military telegrams getting more and more antsy. You were seeing Igor Girkin basically on suicide watch, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Seriously.
And so I think that the main usefulness of Bakhmut as of right now is symbolic. It's symbolism. So all of that symbolism, if they now lose Bakhmut again, all of that not only is lost, I think it's going to be a net negative. Because it's one thing if they didn't take the city and it's like, damn, I can't believe we took another loss. But if they had it and then they lost it, they're going to be fighting about who made us lost it. Well, it was Wagner who made us lost it. No. It was the Shoigu who made it. No, it was Gerasimov. And then the Gerasimov, Shoigu. And why? And they're going to start fighting with each other more and more and more, which they already are. If you read the telegrams of Russian volunteers, and I don't mean the Russian volunteer soldiers, the people who actually signed up for the slaughter, but the people who go and deliver them like headphones, because they have those as well. We have those over here, people who deliver that, like civilians who just try their best to help, and they have theirs who instead have decided to try their best to help an illegal invasion and occupation of another country. I would rather, I don't know, play chess, go fishing, learn a hobby, I don't know, maybe protest against the war, but that's what they've decided to do with their time. But they consistently report that Wagner, that the VDV, that all these different organizations, PMC Convoy, Shoigu's PMC, the PMC Convoy is actually owned, by the way, they were the people who shelled our guys over there when we were in Kherson. That's actually owned by the head of the Kherson, the head of the Crimean occupation, who was installed, who's also a criminal, has deep ties to like criminal activity, murder, and like really, really dark stuff. But most of the Russian occupation forces, all of them, the head of the Donetsk occupation, all of them have like either part of marketing schemes or some type of criminal activity. I think that sorry, I completely lost track. I'm very tired. Bakhmut.
There you go.
It's the symbolism of the city, and I think that it's going to increase the infighting. And because these aid workers, these volunteers for them, they're reporting more infighting. They're reporting that they all hate each other, and there's a breakdown of communication. And when that happens, then that means one PMC gets attacked, Wagner's on the sidelines, they don't support them because they're not answering their calls. Now the people that are protecting your flanks are not communicating with you. That's how you get big retreats. That's how you get these situations where you see them falling back from like lightning counteroffensive in Bakhmut, and that's where you see like 100 to 200 people just running out of a trench because there's no communication. There's no communications. There's no one they can call on for help if communication is breaking down. And I have a feeling if they lose Bakhmut again, that situation's only going to get worse as they start blaming each other, which happened a lot in late war Germany as well.
100%. Same question to Starsky about Bakhmut.
Oh my God, my favorite topic. There was a snail theory that I will talk about a bit later, but Russians bring this battle for Bakhmut as their biggest victory ever. Guys, in Ukraine, there are 25 major cities, okay? Because Ukraine is divided by 25 regions, oblasts. Every center of oblast is a major city, is a big city that controls everything, that has administrative control over everything.
This is Starsky's snail theory about Bakhmut, because... What, you explain this?
Yeah, I gotta do that. Yeah. So, snail theory, give me just 1 second, because it's completely amazing. It was sent to me by one of our viewers. Wait a minute. Oh, here it is. So, a snail has a minimum speed of 0.002 meters per second. The Russian front on August 12, 2022 was only 7 kilometers from the center of Bakhmut. It took 8 months to reach the center of Bakhmut, and there is still a quarter of the city to conquer, not to mention the western suburbs. 8 months are 8 by 30 by 24 by 60 by 60 equals to 20,700,000 seconds. 7,000 meters divided by this number gives 0.0003 meters per second. So it follows that a snail at its slowest speed travels at a speed 8.5 times greater than the Russian army. A snail traveling from where the Russian army was for the span of 8 months would have covered 55,000 meters or 58,000 meters or 58 kilometers, which is 36 miles. Our snail would have traveled through Chasiv Yar, Kramatorsk, passed through Sloviansk, and would be 4 kilometers outside the city at its slowest speed. Yeah. So the returning to the topic of major cities, successful invasion means that Russians would capture at least several major cities. 3 major cities that were controlled by the Russians since 2014, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Sevastopol in Crimea, they were captured in 2014. Russia didn't acquire any success in any oblast. They already annexed like Zaporizhia and Mykolaiv, even despite the fact that they don't control the major cities of those oblasts. The oblasts that are named after those cities. And Bakhmut was their biggest victory, even despite the fact that Bakhmut is 59th biggest city in Ukraine, which is kind of stupid. So they were very upset with losing really important cities like Izium, for example, which is a strategic highway, strategic hub, losing Balaklia, for example, which is approximately the size of Bakhmut, and it contains one of the largest ammo storages in Ukraine. Cities like that, let alone like Bucha and Irpin and Kherson. So the funniest fact that they controlled one major city during this whole time, during 513 days, they managed to control Kherson, the major city, but they decided to give it up in order to fight in Bakhmut. So they lost the major city of Kherson Oblast. That's why when Russians talk about Bakhmut, it's as if fucking, I don't know, Germany starts after Bakhmut. After Bakhmut, there's only like Massachusetts and Alberta and Berlin, of course. Bakhmut is a tiny city, actually. It's I think it's even smaller than
it's the 56th largest city in Ukraine.
Yeah, 56th largest city in Ukraine. That's why they needed that victory, because it was their only victory since beginning of 2023, and they lost massive number of troops there. They lost 25,000 men only in March, and we're talking about dead. So you can imagine like the amount of their losses there, and it's just for a tiny city that, yes, it was very beautiful. It was, let's say, very rich, because in Donbass, before the invasion, but after the beginning of the war, the authorities, Ukrainian government, invested in Bakhmut a lot, because people living on the occupied territories, basically wasteland controlled by fucking gangs and warlords and Russian military tourists and shit like that. They would the first destination they would go while crossing this front line, they would go to Bakhmut. They would see this beautiful place with like McDonald's and banks working and civilization, and it was completely erased. So to Russians, it's like I talked about it actually. I said if Russians ever capture Bakhmut, it will be there, like it will be celebrated as if they captured like whole Ukraine, and now their troops are fighting in the outskirts of Lviv, next to the Polish border.
100%. That's exactly what happened, because before Bakhmut, they had Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, but that was last year. And then in between, they got Pitsky and Marinka, but Marinka is going back under Ukrainian control as we speak. It's being fought over. There's literally nothing left in the village, unfortunately. And then Pitsky, I believe, has already gone back. There's a big section of it that's already gone back under Ukrainian control. So they literally have not had a victory since last year in a city, and they've only lost significant amounts of territory. So they needed Bakhmut, and now it's just slowly being unraveled on the flanks. All right, a couple more questions from the viewers, from Alex.
Thank you, Andrew. I've got one directly for you here, Dylan. I think there's people are interested in. Obviously, you've come over here as a young man and become a war reporter, but they're quite fascinated around. You go out to the front lines. You've interviewed fighters, you interviewed demining units, like Kraken commander. You're making a documentary, and people are interested in how you go about the process of like building the trust and the credibility. Can you sort of explain to people a little bit about how you make that all happen?
Yeah, usually you take the shot, and then you drink the shot, and then you do that, repeat that a few times, and then you've built trust. They call you True Cossack, and then you can interview them. That's how it worked with the demining crews. Yeah. That is how it worked with the demining. People think I'm joking, but that's legitimately. You just treat people like human beings. Yeah. I think a lot of people are like expecting like some magic tricks or something, like you like use something, you do something journalism spell. But if you go to people, you treat them like human beings. You talk to them, and you show you that if you genuine interest in not only like the story, but also just like getting to know them on a personal level. And people will kind of open themselves up to you in a way that I think a lot of mainstream news outlets don't get to do, because they don't take the time. They don't take the time to do that, and it's not really within the code of conduct or like how it's supposed to go. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who do that. I know AP journalists, they have a lot more freedom. I know a good guy called Chris, he's in Kyiv right now, great guy. He does a lot of good work as well, but I think that type of personal connection and just treating people like human beings is the main thing to get these types of connections. That's how it worked for me in Kherson. That's how it worked for me with the demining crews. That's how it worked with me with everything, because I started doing this when I was 21. I didn't have a ton of cash. I had just enough to really cover my expenses and buying all the equipment to do this type of stuff. So it was really just kind of getting to know people, and with time and effort, you can kind of try to embed yourself in not only with a certain group, but hopefully a community.
100%.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And there's a two-part question here that's going to be specific to the war, and you might have to answer it in a fairly long way. But so, what's your view, Dylan, and perhaps Starsky as well, and Andrew, really, I guess, on what realistically needs to be done to win and end this war, and what's really the steps to do that?
We'll go with him, Starsky.
You spot the Russian soldier. You kill the Russian soldier, and then you take the position he had. I mean, that's the basic concept of how you like win a war. What was it, that Patton speech in that movie? Like, I don't want people to die for the country. I want people to make that other poor bastard die for his country. Like that's a basic idea. I'm not a strategist, so I'm not gonna like give like I'm gonna do the Schlieffen plan remastered. Like I can't offer that up to you, right? I didn't even finish like college, so much less West Point, right? Right. So I can't offer any advice. But this is the one piece that I know that I am confident about, that how well Ukraine performs and how fast they perform, because they could still get it without the support. But I think the thing that will help Ukraine garner its success the most will be whether or not the West has resolve, whether or not the West sticks to its guns, doesn't back down when the going gets tough, or when it might be profitable to give Putin an off-ramp. That means capturing Ukrainian territory. That means taking these villages that they've illegally captured. I think that Western aid right now it's nice, but it needs to increase. It needs to increase at an exponential level. The reason why there isn't a lightning counteroffensive in Zaporozhye isn't because it physically is impossible. It's because the Ukrainians only have so many tools. They don't have air superiority. They don't have tons of F-16s flying around. Americans are familiar with like Afghanistan and Iraq, where we've quickly went in, disabled the opposition, and then had to deal with long occupations. But no, the American soldiers I've talked to in the Legion, their experience in Afghanistan, their experience in Iraq is completely different here. I remember I interviewed one Legionnaire, and he was talking about an experience out, I think it was during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, I forget exactly where it was, but they got engaged in a firefight, they got pinned down, and one of the guys, a newer guy, turned to him and said, "We need air support." And he looked at him like he was insane, like, "Oh, what, you need like, what, you want like Martians to come down, UFOs? What else? You have space lasers?" Like,
because it's so common in the U.S. military. You know, we don't leave the wire, because I served in the U.S. Army, and we don't leave without air support. We don't leave without a Black Hawk in the air, on the ready, you know what I mean? 9 lines, and so you're 100% right.
Yeah. So I think it's going to depend on the resolve of the West, and also the ability for the West to up artillery production as fast as physically possible. The Biden administration said that these cluster munitions that have been sent over, they're not supposed to be a permanent solution. They're meant to be a transition weapon, that for a certain period of time, they're going to be given these cluster munitions until American artillery production can increase to a point where we can replenish it just naturally with what we're doing. And these plants in like Pennsylvania and across the country, they are upping production. They're doubling production from what it used to be. But this is such an artillery-intensive war. 60 to 70% of the people are not dying in like, you know, Call of Duty like firefights that people see in video games. It's from you're standing there and then an artillery shell hits you and then you're dead. 70% of it's artillery death. That's how the war is being fought. And so that upping that production and making sure we can work with our South Korean allies so they can also transfer their shells like they did earlier this year, where they sent 500,000 shells to replenish as stockpiles. We need to do that with South Korea. We need to do that with Japan. I think that is going to be the two things that I do know for sure is going to be a big determining factor on Ukraine's success in the immediate future.
100%. 100%. Starsky, the victory. How?
So there are two answers, the short one and long one. The short one is we have to make Russian soldiers disappear in the thermal scopes, okay, by combining Russian soldiers with accelerated metal particles and shock waves. Exactly as Dylan said, we have to take their positions and push them out of our borders, restore internationally recognized borders of 1991. Despite all the bullshit, Crimea was always Russian and shit like that. We have internationally recognized borders. If you want to live in Russia, go fucking live in Russia.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll buy you a ticket. As for the long answer is, guys, first of all, Russians have to stop denying Ukrainians' right to exist as a nation, because this is what they all share. They don't recognize Ukrainians as a separate nation with their own history, own culture, own language. They don't recognize Ukraine as part of Europe, part of civilized society, and this must stop. And the only thing to stop it is to change Russian government that produces this bullshit, change Russian philosophy, change their mindset. But it's probably the hardest task. It's easier to free Ukraine than to change Russian mindset, because this is the way they were raised through centuries, not just 2-3 centuries, but like 500 years. This is the way they were raised. This is the way they were educated, that there is Russian Empire, all other nations, fuck other nations, like they don't exist, like we don't care about them. Enemies everywhere, that's why we have to dominate world and kill everybody. This is their mindset. So the long answer is we have to change Russians inside of themselves. It will take fucking decades, I think, because like generations should change before it even becomes possible, before the democratic society in Russia becomes possible. This is my answer.
Peace through superior firepower. And that's exactly how it's done. Restore the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, like Starsky said, including Crimea, because it is Ukraine. And if the Russians want this to end, if the tankies and the fascists want this shit to end because they're claiming all this bullshit, the fastest way that could get done is the Russians to just leave Ukraine. Like, pull their military out, get the fuck out, go back to Russia, and start paying reparations and ask for forgiveness for the next 100 years probably, and then maybe after 100 years Ukrainians might consider it. Might consider it, I don't know, it might be longer, we'll see. It's up to Ukrainians, obviously. So a few more questions, you guys. I'm not sure, Alex has to get to work later, so I'm not sure if he's getting ready to get going. It's still a work week here. People do, it is a very, listen, Kyiv is a very busy city, like, despite everything, despite the Russian invasion, in Kyiv now, it's you know, we have the occasional alarm now, it seems. MiG takes off, but the alarm goes off. But life is going on. It's a show of resilience. It's a big FU to Vladimir Putin that the people here in Kyiv and Ukraine are still continuing their daily lives and working, and you know, it's just a busy city. I mean, you can hear the traffic in the background. You got big traffic here in Kyiv. You know, if you don't get early enough, like Starsky has to leave early to get here because of how much traffic there is. It's not like it's not shut down. People are not living in fear here. They're staying resilient in the face of the Russian aggression. A couple super chats that it came in. So let's go here, see. Oh, here we go. So, okay, so Revenge, thank you. Jared B, thank you. Okay, Sugar Nut says, hey Dylan, how disappointed are you in the YouTube content creators, oh, you're gonna love this one, who lean to the left and the way they are pro-Russian or want to start negotiations immediately? Hassan. Hassan Piker!
The thing that I have a funny story about Hassan Piker, actually. Hassan Piker, I mean, he doesn't like me very much.
Of course.
He said that I'm the only comment I know that he's talked about me directly is he called me a ruthless neoliberal, right?
Jesus.
Which is weird because, like, I'm not even like that much of, I'm a pretty, you know, I'm a really big union guy. I'm pretty, you know, I would consider myself pretty left wing. But putting that aside, something that really bothered me recently from him is he said that attacking the Kerch Bridge is a war crime because it's civilian infrastructure.
Yeah, he can fuck.
And this is the second time that he said this, because I remember I had to call him out for the same thing like 3 or 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah.
And he hasn't learned his lesson.
Yeah.
I know that if he talks to any international law scholar, any military historian, like anybody, I don't know, that is not like a single-celled organism, they should be able to tell him that yes, it is not a war crime to target something that is contributing to the Russian war effort as a major artery. And it's not just a supply line, it is the supply line for the Russian occupation in Crimea, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, and was built during the occupation to sustain the occupation. That was its primary purpose. And if you go on Russian state TV, they will admit to it. They'll say that it is a important military objective for the Ukrainians. Even they will say that it's an important military objective. Now afterwards, they'll call it terrorism because, of course, the Russian state TV people are two-faced and you can't get truth out of them no matter how much you shake them. That is extremely. That bothers me so much because it just feels like it's pointlessly both sides in the situation where they're trying to compare the bombing of apartment blocks, the reckless targeting of civilians, bombing of aid workers, which I've personally witnessed, to the targeting of a supply line that is being used to ship tanks, artillery guns, artillery shells, troops. fuel, everything that is necessary to sustain the war effort. That Kerch Bridge, through its transportation of supplies, has killed more civilians than no matter how many strikes they'll do on that Kerch Bridge,
100%.
through the amount of artillery shells and shipments they have put through it. And there is not a single international law scholar that'll disagree with me on that. So that's something that's really bothered me recently. But I think that the main thing is that for the American left, the last 30, 40 years, and even before that, has been dominated by trying to keep America from getting entangled in wars like Iraq, and has been entangled in stopping America from getting in wars like Afghanistan, right? And so after getting burned by all of these foreign wars, where they're told, oh yes, we're going for freedom in Afghanistan, and after 20 years, the Afghans many of them don't want them there. We establish a very corrupt government in Ashraf Ghani, who fled the country at the first sign of trouble. In Iraq, we haven't been able to produce stability. There has been a lot of course, jihadi movements that have come out of Iraq that we haven't been able to keep under control. Of course, insurgency was extremely powerful. Us trying to trying to get rid of the Ba'ath Party and drag it out was not extremely successful. It was all these mistakes, as well as wars that we probably, in my opinion, shouldn't have fought. We shouldn't have been in Iraq. And so they've been burnt so many times that they've become so cynical. And because of that cynical nature, they've receded into being isolationists. They've receded into being like, America can't do anything good, so we shouldn't do anything. But if you recede to that, what kind of thing are you admitting to? That as human beings, we can't help other nation states. As human beings, we can't help other people across the world in defending their nation state. That we can't do what we tried to do with the Lend-Lease program in World War II. We've lost the ability to have that type of a positive influence in the world. America is just doomed forever to just sit on the sidelines as the Russians slaughter civilians, as the Chinese possibly invade and conquer Taiwan, a prospering democratic society. That's not something that I accept. I don't want to support the war in Yemen, because I don't think that was something that was not only helping America, but not helping the people of Yemen either. And those are the types of conflicts that I think America should de-invest from. Stop supporting authoritarian dictatorships and monarchies like in Saudi Arabia, and start supporting nation states that share our values, like Ukraine.
Exactly, dude. Way to put that. 100%, dude. Go ahead.
I wanted to add one thing regarding the Kerch Bridge. So in Ukraine, for example, as a representative of law enforcement, I can tell you this. In Ukraine, for example, if you want to sell hot dogs and you just go like, oh, okay, I will put my kiosk on Khreshchatyk and I will sell hot dogs, it will be considered an illegal construction. You don't just do that, because there are rules. You gotta go to like a city hall and buy land or rent a land and put your kiosk and sell your hot dogs. If you just occupy this land, then it will be removed by police officers instantly. Same with Kerch Bridge, because Kerch Bridge is an illegal construction. It was constructed illegally. That's why it will also be removed sooner or later, but 100% it will.
100%. Way to answer that. And yeah, when I was watching Hassan's, like, it didn't even sound like Hassan was confident when he was saying it too. He's like, guys, like, right? Like, it's a war crime, right? Like, it didn't even sound like he was coming off confident in his chat. I was reading his chat too, and he was saying, and they're like, no, like, Hassan.
I mean, he's taken so many L's on this issue.
And this is the same guy who had the hammer sickle flag behind him, though, before the war started, and he took it away. So, yeah, his Ukraine takes are absolute dog shit, Hassan Piker. It's just horrible. So thank you for that question. Perfect question. I was hoping we were going to get a question like that. Dylan, you're a legend. What do you reckon the Wagner PMC are going to do next from Belarus, if any?
Man, I watched I would say yesterday on stream, but it was this morning on stream. I watched a new video from Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is surprisingly still not dead. He has not been sledgehammered, which, by the way, if he does go, even though I'm against wishing death to another human being on principle, but if he does go, right, I hope he goes the way of the sledgehammer. I think it would be an amazing cosmic karma. But when it comes to the Wagner Group, he was in Belarus making a speech with Dmitry Utkin, the neo-Nazi, on his side, and he was saying, look, Shoigu and all these fools, they mismanaged war. He's still lambasting the Ministry of Defense after everything. The fact that he can still do that in my opinion, is a rebuff to the government.
Yeah.
The fact that he can still continue to engage in the rhetoric that led up to the I don't know if you think it's a mutiny or a coup. I lean more towards mutiny. Either way, the chaos that ended up killing like 20 Russian airmen, 9 aircraft, command aircraft getting shot down. The fact that he's still alive is already, after Putin directly went on TV and said, you will stop, we will bring the traitors to justice. That's already a problem. But not only is he still alive, he gets to keep his wealth. Not only does he get to keep his wealth, he gets to keep a certain faction of Wagner still under his control in Belarus, training the Belarusian military, possibly helping them put down any, dissent, anybody that likes democracy or is critical of their participation in the war, and now gets to go across Africa, looting the Central African Republic, Sudan, working with the genocidal rapid support forces, which is really just the Janjaweed with a new makeup reover that engaged in a genocide in the Darfur that is currently killing and slaughtering anybody that opposes them, led by Hemedti, a very brutal commander. They are using shell companies to steal resources from this area, to take gold out of Sudan, to take gold out of the Central African Republic. In Syria, every gas field that they would capture, they would get 25% of the revenue of. That's how Wagner made money internationally, through these shell companies, as they used to back in the day before Putin went on TV like, we gave you everything. They used to deny it by using these shell companies. He now is in a perfect position. He gets to leave the war where everybody's getting slaughtered and maimed, go to Africa, make money by taking these resources out of the continent with his boys, the Wagner boys, and he's still alive, sitting pretty in his wealth. Look, I'm not saying he has the same influence that he used to. Wagner's not going to be the same size. He's not going to have the same influence that he used to. But his existence and continued prosperity is a signal that you can challenge Putin and not only survive, but still prosper. And that is a dangerous message to send to the other Russian oligarchs who, even if they're not planning to overthrow Putin themselves, they're thinking of contingency plans.
They're
plans. Getting their jets and they're filling them with fuel and waiting for something to go wrong and jump on there and get out of there.
Yeah.
We saw the jets moving around when everything was going off. Lukashenko was thinking about his contingency plans. Everyone was thinking about the contingency plans. So I think Yevgeny Prigozhin, and from the way he sounded in the video, he might, still be a little antsy about whether he's gonna, find a Humpty Dumpty found a great fall, But I think he's, relatively speaking to what he did, he's sitting pretty.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Do you have anything on the Wagner in Belarus? No problem. If they try, it'll fail. It's going to be a slaughter if they ever did try. So, all right, a few more. Wayne, thank you for the 5 gifteds. Mets for Starsky. No, are you worried about Wagner at the northern border? He already answered. He literally just answered that. Deborah, love to all your warrior poets. Slava Ukraine. Thank you. Philip Ittner. Well, that and find a good mentor in terms of. I assume that's back when you were talking about how you got connections.
That's true. Philip, actually, when I was back in the States, he was messaging me, being like, hey, do you need any help? I can get you in contact with this person. I can get you in contact with this person. Philip is a great guy. He actually took me down and covered my expenses, actually going to Zaporozhye. I don't know if he wants that to be public or not, but I'm making it public anyway to hype him up. Very lovely guy.
Absolutely, and he's going to be mentoring me the further that I come back here. He's got lots of knowledge, just a wealth of knowledge. I love bagels, gutter chat, love Dylan Burns TV.
Gutter chat's a Dylan Burns TV reference. So I have. Don't worry about it. Dump me.
I'll find out about that the more we co-stream. So Jackson, Hinkle Jackson.
Yeah, he doesn't like me very much.
Oh, he doesn't like you either.
He challenged me to a boxing match.
Oh wow. Oh,
yeah. I said yes, and then he didn't follow up.
Of course, he never would. So apparently he's going on Piers Morgan. What do you think Morgan justifies? So, for my opinion, then I'll give it to Dylan because he's had direct interaction with Hacks and Jinkle. It depends on if Piers Morgan is going to challenge him or not, because Jackson is overtly pro-Russian, like pro-genocide, he sells Z merch. He's with the Miss Russia he's like a full-on FSB paid troll at this point. Like, it's no question about it. It's not a matter of
money from pro-Assad lobby groups. I mean,
I'll let Dylan cook here in a second, but he is just full on. It depends on, in my opinion, if Piers Morgan's going to challenge him or if he's going to be like, oh, let's hear your opinions and let's get them in the ether so like people can listen. All right, what do you got?
I've debated Jackson Hinkle twice. The first time, it just felt like he was unprepared and mad. I debated him on Taiwan.
Yeah.
It seemed like he didn't know anything about Taiwan. Then the conversation moved over to Syria, and the only thing he knew about Syria was that he thought that Assad didn't gas his own people. Then I asked him anything else about Syria. I asked him about the 2004 football protests and the crackdowns and everything else, and it seemed like all he knew was Grain Zone articles about like chemical attacks. And so it was just. He's an expert in the cherry-picked information that somebody has, quote-unquote, revealed to him that shows him the truth about the world.
Yeah.
You know, this kind of Tom Clancy syndrome, where you feel like you know the underground truth that nobody else knows, that makes you the special little snowflake.
Tom Clancy syndrome is awesome.
And so that's how I view Jackson Hinkle, as somebody just deep in the recesses of Tom Clancy syndrome. But I also don't believe that he actually believes a lot of the stuff he says.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's a grift because he used to be a Bernie Sanders kid.
Yeah, he was.
And he used to go on the Young Turks and be like, yeah, Bernie Sanders is the way to go. And then he's made a complete 180 where he's like, the transgenders are ruining America and they're going to ban the gays. And like all this like nonsense that is just a complete 180 that I just have to believe has some financial motivation. And the dude interpersonally is just a scumbag piece of shit. I don't know if I can cuss.
Yeah, you can.
I remember once I was in a Twitter space and I was talking about, the war in Ukraine, and I was in a conservative Twitter space, so I was trying to go into the environments where people disagree with me, because I you can tell I kind of thrive I thrive in these types of conversations.
Yeah.
And he comes in there, and by the end of the conversation, I'm asking him about money he took from a pro-Bashar al-Assad lobby group, and he got mad, he got angry, and then he started going after my mother's heroin addiction that ended up killing her. And that's the way the people who support Russia engage. That if they're willing to support the mass slaughter of Ukrainians, it's not that surprising that interpersonally they're also just huge pieces of shit.
Yeah.
And that's just how Jackson Hinkle has always operated since he's engaged in the kind of like the online media space. But it's just gotten worse and worse and worse as time goes on. If there's a dictatorship somewhere that vaguely doesn't like America, he is 100% in favor of it every time.
What an absolute piece of shit. Starsky.
Yeah, I completely agree regarding the pro-Russian pieces of shit, because it's every time I see that a lot of in my commentaries. Every time I post some updates on a residential building in Dnipro was hit, killing numerous people, all the part of the multi-story building collapsed and things like that, and they go Slava Россия, in the commentaries, or a soldier got decapitated, they go Slava Россия. Basically, I decided that it's a good habit to say Slava Россия whenever you do something disgusting. For example, whenever I take a shit, I go like Slava Россия. It's absolutely beautiful in my opinion.
Yeah, anyone when you're debating them or you're calling them out on their lies or misinformation, and then they divert and go personal, like they just go at something just completely irrelevant, off topic, and come at your personal life or your family's personal life, they've already lost. They're completely lost at that point, but it also verifies how much of a piece of a shit they are, and they're not even really worth even debating, in my opinion, after that. A few more. So that was it on Hacks and Jinkle. Hiroshi the dog, the Kerch Bridge is a Russian weapon, absolutely. So Philip says, except for when the U.S. Okay, so this is back when you're talking about Wagner in Syria, I believe. U.S. forces smacked Wagner when they tried to take the oil fields in Syria. AC-130 all the way.
Yeah, no, that was a slaughter. I believe the casualty numbers for the Russians was nearing 100, and on the other side there was one injury, and it was a Syrian SDF guy who I guess tripped or something. Yeah. Must have tripped on the way to get a Coke out of the vending machine. I don't know, but I mean they got trounced there and they got slaughtered. And the thing that's really funny about this, and I don't know what it is about the Russians and trying to turn their losses into W's, but they gave the people, just for surviving the battle, medals of them shooting AK-47s at Apache helicopters. They weren't shooting AK-47s at Apache helicopters. They were hiding in whatever dirt mound they could find in the general area. And if they survived, they were one of the lucky ones. I mean, they got trounced there, but they also provoked the situation. They attacked the oil field, they attacked the SDF position. These positions were kind of entrenched. Everyone knew where the demarcation line was, and they went out and attacked it anyway. And so they brought it upon themselves.
It seems like a common theme of the Russians bringing their own demise upon themselves and then crying after it's dealt with or after it's responded. Trust me, they do not. Like a direct, like take nukes away, obviously. Direct conflict with the U.S. would just be an absolute slaughter. Our Air Force would just annihilate the Russians in ridiculous ways. But all right, you guys, it's like nearly 9:30 in the morning here. Like I said, let's have some breakfast and let Dylan get some rest so we can. You stream every day?
I stream Monday through Friday from 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Twitch, Dylan Burns TV on Twitch, and I also have a main YouTube channel, Dylan Burns TV on YouTube. That's where I post my more serious journalistic content, not my stream stuff.
Awesome. And then Operator Starsky as well. You do a war update every day, correct?
Yeah, I do war updates almost every day whenever there's some important information, whatever some important happens. I'm trying to do updates as soon as I can, as soon as possible, even despite I have like a vacation, which is rare, which is freaking like Ukraine is at the state of war, full-scale invasion, and I'm given a 10 days vacation. I think it's beautiful because this is Ukraine.
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. As always, thank you very much for supporting my people. This is very important. One of the things that basically was my motivation of creating my channel was this huge support of international community that was thirsty for the information from the ground, what happens in Ukraine, and I highly appreciate your support. Samantha Williams here with closing thoughts.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Samantha.
Short but effective. All right, Dylan, final thoughts? On your mind?
I mean, I don't know. Is there anything on my mind?
Or whatever you want to say to the people that it might, or just anything, honestly.
I don't know, man. I guess the only thing I have to say is that I hope you guys continue to follow the war, continue to please contact your congressman, let them know your position. I know a lot of you guys watching right now haven't contacted your democratically elected representative, and let them know how much you appreciate them being in favor of aid or how much you don't appreciate them not being in favor of aid. I know a lot of you guys, I see you, whoever you watching, I see you right now. You got to go contact your congressman. Please do. I would appreciate it, because all the donations in the world, they're helpful, but none of that can match the full might of the United States military and what's in our arsenal.
Exactly that. All right, you guys. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Kadal Kump says Slava, or Klem Frump says Slava. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of Good Morning Kyiv.